This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
And we're back.
We are indeed, and we have just so everybody knows where we are in terms of the general timeline of things. We have, I believe, 3 teams in the Final Four that have never been there before.
Mm-hmm. And UT just moments ago just lost.
Screwed the pooch. All right, this is
completely cratered.
Completely cratered. Welcome to Dream Idiots. My name is Morris. The feller across the screen from me there is Bryan.
Howdy.
We are coming to you from Denver and San Antonio, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been around a while. This is episode 62. Each week we tell each other and you stories. We drag you along for the ride. And you can get a hold of us all kinds of places. Right, Bryan?
Yes, indeed. Dreamidiots.com. There's a list of stuff there. You can click on merchandise. You can find us on pretty much every single podcast platform there is these days. It's at Dream Idiots on Facebook, at Dream Idiots on Instagram, and whichever platform you're on, Spotify or Apple or Amazon or whatever. If you wouldn't mind going on there and shooting us 5 stars and maybe even sending us a review, that'd be great. Helps us climb the charts. Our numbers keep climbing. February was our biggest month, and March should be even bigger than that. So things are heading in the right direction.
All right, trending in the right direction. I like that. Do we have anything to catch up on? Any updates or anything we just updated everybody on the Final Four, which is by the time this drops, well settled. So.
Mm-hmm. No updates on episodes, although I realized this morning 13 years ago today. Do you know where you were? I know where you were. I was with you.
40th birthday party.
No, my birthday is February 20th. So.
Right, but I thought maybe we had it late. No, where was I?
We were at PTA Stadium in our whatever it's called. We were at the Elite 8 round or Sweet 16 round. We watched Baylor.
Oh,
we watched Duke. I think Duke beat Purdue and Baylor beat Texas State, I think.
That's some good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah.
2010.
Wow. We're old.
Yeah.
Ryan, I get to go first this week because it is an even numbered episode.
Absolutely. You're
up.
All
right. Bryan, you ever heard the name MIlo Radulovich?
MIlo Radulovich. I have not.
Well, he's a good Irishman. No, I'm just kidding. He's not.
Is he Bobo the Clown or no?
He is not. He was a first-generation American of Serbian/Montenegrin descent. I'll explain more of that in a moment. He was born October 28th, 1926 in Detroit, Michigan. He majored in meteorology at the University of Michigan while also serving as lieutenant in the Air Force Reserves. Now, just as a quick side note, because I'll be using some of these terms here and there, I believe it was 1918 after World War I, the state of the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs merged with the Kingdom of Serbia and the Kingdom of Montenegro. So you had 3 separate entities, a state, 2 kingdoms, and they formed the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which was renamed Yugoslavia in 1929. I think that's right. But anyway, that's just kind of a background on where his family came from, because that will become important in a moment. On August 21st of 1953, at home with his wife and daughters in Dexter, Michigan, outside of Detroit, MIlo received a visit from an Air Force major and sergeant. They came to his house, which was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But he
anyway, I'm sorry. Guys. In what year?
1953.
Okay.
And he was informed that his 10-year service to his country in the Air Force was at an end. His officer's commission as a first lieutenant was revoked, and he was to be discharged immediately. And he said later that the major was very kind of not quite distraught, but very uncomfortable talking to him about this. But he wanted to point out, the major did, that Milo's loyalty to the armed forces and his country were not in question. It was rather the loyalty to the country of some folks that he kept in his company. In other words, it's not you we're worried about, it's people you hang out with.
Uh-huh.
He had maintained, quote, a close and continuing association with two individuals whose political actions had come under scrutiny from the Air Force. So a close and continuing association is what cost him his commission. These two people were his father, John Radulovich, and his sister, Margaret Fishman. Any of this ringing a bell?
I'm stumped.
So here's the charges against Dad. John, or Jovan, I think was his name was before he got it Americanized. John Radulovich was accused of subscribing to Slobodnovik Rek, which translates to free expression, a paper associated with the American Slav Congress, an organization which has been labeled as communist by the Attorney General. Now, I'm not sure which Attorney General it was. There's a number of Attorneys General this could have happened under.
Right, sure.
Between the end of World War II and 1953, Tom C. Clark, a name that we're familiar with, we have a high school named Clark High School, which is named after Tom C. Clark there in San Antonio. It could have been any number one of these folks, but that organization was labeled as communist. He was also charged was Papa Radulovich, with, quote, spreading Russian and communist propaganda in the factory of the Hudson Motor Car Company where he worked. And Milo pointed a couple things out. He said, well, first of all, my father didn't subscribe to Slobodana Rek. He did read it, but he also read the anti-communist paper Sobobran, which means defender of the Serbs. So he was reading both sides of the political spectrum, really not for the politics, but as a means to keep up of what was going on in Yugoslavia. Right?
Sure.
That's how he kept, because English was not his first language. So he read it in a language he understood in order to keep up with what was going on in his native land. And he also points out that Milo points out that his dad's English was rudimentary. So his ability to spread propaganda in the workplace didn't make any sense. He really couldn't speak English very well. Now, Margaret's charges, again, she was married. Her last name was Fishman. However, caused problems by, well, Bryan, she liked to join picket lines and protest stuff. For instance, she protested the Book Cadillac Hotel's denial of a room to actor, performer, singer, civil rights leader Paul Robeson.
Okay.
From you might have listeners might recognize him from Showboat. His famous number was "Old Man River," that deep bass voice that just brings out those tones. The great Paul Robeson, they wouldn't give him a hotel room, so she joined a protest line saying, "Give this man a room." She also protested the indictment of 12 communist leaders under the Smith Act. We remember the Smith Act. That's for folks who have subversive actions, perhaps promoting or promulgating the idea of a violent overthrow of the United States government. It's also known as the Alien Registration Act. So she protested the indictment of these folks. She attended a conference regarding deportation hysteria. Too many immigrants in the country in 1953. We got to get rid of them. In the 1950s, let's get them out of here. None of this should sound familiar. And in the fourth place, she attended a commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the Daily Worker newspaper, a socialist newspaper for the common working folk. I believe we brought up the Daily Worker at one point, maybe in my Alamo episode that one time.
Could be.
But it's pretty clear that Margaret has leftist ideals. But it's also pretty clear that she's adhering to and using her First Amendment rights. The rights of free speech, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, the right to peaceably assemble. Now, Milo requested a hearing from the Air Force, and the Air Force attorney at that hearing presented a sealed manila envelope, which he claimed held the evidence against Milo's family. In this sealed envelope, I have the evidence against your father and your sister. No one on the board who was hearing it, or Milo's attorney, or Milo himself, were allowed to see the evidence. It remained sealed. Milo was offered a chance to resign, but he knew that his file would carry the tag of, quote, resignation in lieu of elimination from the service, something that would dog him forever. And he had this long-term plan because he wanted to study meteorology. He needed the money from the GI Bill to continue his services. So if he gave up his commission, he would no longer be serving his country, and his own personal future would be in jeopardy. So he decided to fight it. Now, what happened then is interesting. He had taken on a civilian attorney, and his story caught the eye of a fellow by the name of Edward R. Murrow. Yeah, CBS reporter, best known for his work broadcasting live from London during World War II, especially during the Blitzkrieg. If listeners have never heard that, look that up, where he's just reporting live from buildings as London is being bombed. It's pretty incredible stuff. And Edward R. Murrow brought Radulovich's story to the attention of his fellow journalist and news producer at CBS, Fred W. Friendly, one of my favorite names in all of broadcasting.
Right, sure, yeah.
So on October 20th, 1953, the television program See It Now, a documentary news program created by Friendly and Murrow, presented an episode titled The Case of MIlo Radulovich, which lays out the entire story in greater detail than I presented here. Murrow was the host of this weekly program, and he and Friendly knew what this meant. What it meant is that this would place CBS News, and Murrow in particular, fully in the crosshairs of Senator Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee. Now, the response of this episode was immediate. And what it did is it just had clips of the Radulovich family talking about their experiences. Why are we being accused of this? Why can't we see the evidence? We don't understand why my career of 10 years is coming to an end. Don't we have the right to associate with people as we see fit? Don't we have the right to protest these?
Right.
It's a pretty remarkable piece of television, even, what are we looking at, Bryan, 70 years later? Variety called The Case of MIlo Radulovich the most important television broadcast of the year. New York Times writer Jack Gould said, the program marked perhaps the first time that a major network, the Columbia Broadcasting System, and one of the country's most important industrial sponsors, the Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa, and if you've ever looked at old TV shows, you might recognize Alcoa presents the Radio Mystery Hour, that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's the first time that they consented to a program taking a vigorous editorial stand in a matter of national importance and controversy. A fellow by the name of Don Suring, who happened to be Senator Joseph McCarthy's agent, called it the Radwich junk and proceeded to announce that the senator, what did you think that he proceeded to announce that the senator had proof of, Bryan?
Oh, I'm sure.
Take a stab.
Suddenly, I would assume that both Friendly and Murrow were communist sympathizers, or
give that man a chicken dinner. He claimed that the senator had proof that, quote, Murrow was on the Soviet payroll in 1934 because Murrow had been part of this cultural exchange program between the Soviet Union that was part of a government program that was designed to kind of bring our countries together in a mutual exchange of ideas and cultural cooperation. I would also like to point out that Don Suring, his name is basically urine with just an S on the front. just in case you're
throwing
wondering.
it out there.
Now, the part of where this story gets great to me, there's 2 points that really get great. Radulovich was reinstated by the Air Force 5 weeks after the episode aired. So by Christmas time, he was back in his Air Force Reserve uniform. And this episode also marked the turning point for the public fall of Joe McCarthy. By March of 1954, Senator Joseph McCarthy himself was the subject of a See It Now episode. And just to brush up on who Joe McCarthy was, the junior senator from Wisconsin, who had a rotating number of communists that he knew were in the state departments and governments in the United States. The number would change from 209. I believe it was a Wheeling, West Virginia Women's Republicans Club that he made this announcement in. He would do whatever it could to get people on the stands and basically hound and badger them, make their lives miserable. Right. Who knows how many careers were ruined and lives were ended because of this piece of shit and his piece of shit assistant, Roy Cohn. The televised Army McCarthy hearings, where McCarthy took on Reds in the Army, those hearings dominated the news. They were televised in the spring of 1954. And before the year's end, by December of that year, 54, McCarthy would be censured by the Senate. He died less than 3 years later, May 2nd, 1957. The official cause of death was acute hepatitis. I suspect, as others do, it was because he had a breathtaking case of alcoholism. We think of McCarthy as this old dude. He was 48 when he died.
Oh,
But
seriously?
if you look at pictures of him, he looks
ancient. Yeah, I would
he
have
looks
guessed 75.
68. He looks 20 years older than that. He was 48
Good.
when he
All
died.
right, fuck him.
So here's some final thoughts. And then I'll talk about why I wanted to bring this up. Fred W. Friendly, the journalist, educator, president of CBS News from 1964 to 1966, said, "Of all the broadcasts I've been involved in, of all the issues I've examined, I select the MIlo Radulovich program to show my students each semester at the Columbia School of Graduate Journalism. I have found no better way to illustrate the role journalism plays in a free and open society than by citing the case against MIlo Radulovich." Edward R. Murrow died April 27th, 1965. Don't smoke, kids. Fred W. Friendly died March 3rd, 1998. And MIlo Radulovich himself died November 19th, 2007, having outlived Senator McCarthy by half a century.
And he was how old when he died? 90?
He was pushing 90. Yeah.
I was just doing the math.
Oh, well, no, he was 81. Yeah, he was 81 when he died. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can see a lot of this if you've there's an excellent film about this that's called Good Night and Good Luck, starring David Strathairn, and George Clooney is in it. I believe Strathairn was nominated for Best Actor that year, and George Clooney plays Fred W. Friendly. It's a great book. It's a great movie. Came out in 2005. Highly recommended. A lot of the story is gone over that, and you get a lot of the famous quotes from this, where Murrow is basically sitting with his staff and looks at everybody in the room and says, "If there's anything we need to know about your past, we need to know it now, because they're going to find out."
Right.
They kind of look at each other, and the famous quote that kind of sums up McCarthyism in this era in American history was, "The fear is right here in this room." I mean, there hasn't been anyone quite like Edward R. Murrow. I mean, I don't
absolutely.
think anyone, when you build the Mount Rushmore of great journalists, I guess you start with Edward R. Murrow, Nellie Bly, maybe a few others. Sources for this piece: Eric Barnow's excellent, it's a trilogy, but the third book in particular from 1970, The Image Empire, A History of Broadcasting in the United States, from 1953, from Oxford University Press in New York. Joseph Persico's 1988 book, Edward R. Murrow, an American Original, but Da Capo Press in New York. And Michael Ranville's 1997 book, this is from Momentum Press in Troy, Michigan. A great book that looks at the MIlo Radulovich case in a day-by-day analysis of what was happening to the Radulovich family.
Oh, wow.
Up until the time, from the day he got the notice that is being revoked to the day he appeared on the television program. So it follows this day by day, and then he gives you a little blurb about what was happening in the greater world at that time. This book is called To Strike at a King, The Turning Point in the McCarthy Witch Hunts. And there's also an Edward R. Murrow collection available on DVD, CBS Video, that actually has the videotapes of the video presentations of not only the Radulovich story, but the subsequent episodes about McCarthy, where he just brilliantly takes McCarthy down. Even if 1 in 3 people still agreed with McCarthy at the time, it was a stepping stone to his ultimate downfall and destruction.
Nice.
This is the kind of stuff I turn to when we are facing what we're facing these days, where certain government people will tell us things aren't what they are something else, when they're trying to control what our kids can read, when they're burning books, when they're banning shit. This is the kind of thing I like to turn to from history, is moments like this where one person in their individual lives makes a decision to say, no, I'm not going to take that shit anymore. And journalism does what journalism is supposed to do. And that's get at the truth.
Right. And that's sadly lacking. I mean, it is, very much very reminiscent of what's happening with, Ron DeSantis and, banning, but yeah, just what you said. It's the same shit all over again, where someone is trying, maybe it's DeSantis as well, or it feels like a Florida thing, where there is someone was pushing or proposing legislation whereby if you were a journalist, basically if you had unidentified sources, you weren't allowed to use them, or I mean, I don't have details in front of me, obviously, but I think this was Florida, where they're working up to pass legislation to make it impossible for journalists to write news stories citing anonymous sources, because they want everything to be laid bare so they can go after anyone who opposes them. And so, the fact that we're circling back around now to a universe of people that are incredibly comfortable with fascism. I mean, that's just what it is, and that's what that's all about what McCarthy. I mean, his was communism, or this illusion of communism, in order to stoke fear. I mean, they're doing it in different ways now, but still make people afraid, manipulate the truth. Yeah, scumbags.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a lot to make comparisons and just see what I mean when his press agent, it's the typical trick where someone says, well, you're doing this, well, what about what you did?
Right.
Doesn't answer the question of
right.
this or that, but instead says, well, Edward R. Murrow is a communist. Edward R. Murrow is the furthest thing from a communist. It's just remarkable, particularly when you look at the legacy that someone like Roy Cohn has left behind, where he is this generational touchstone that connects Donald Trump to Joe McCarthy. I mean, it's just
via Bush and Nixon and right, all those scumbags, same fucking playbook.
You turn over the rocks and the same creeps crawl out. It's just
right. Like,
here they are again. Anyway, I highly recommend all of these books if you've not read them. There's some great books that are also that transcribe some of Murrow's broadcasts from London. I actually found a 2-disc collection on vinyl, of course, of Murrow's broadcasts from London, which I've not listened to yet. I've had them for years, and they're just kind of sitting there. I need to pop those on and check them out to see what they're like. So there you go. The Case of MIlo Radulovich.
Yeah, very, very cool. That's awesome. Thank you.
What are you laughing at?
This was pretty funny. And actually, there is some kind of low level kismet to my story, which you will see shortly. But first,
yes.
Time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
My question for you is, what are your thoughts on fucking? Are you pro fucking? Are you anti fucking? I'm talking about before you get paranoid. I'm talking about a town. 3 weeks ago, I think I did. Was making fun of people's towns, villages, cities across the world that have rather unfortunate names. And there is actually one I lopped off that list. I wanted to save it for later. There is a village in this world called fucking, Fucking. Can you guess the country?
The Netherlands.
Ooh, close. Just imagine Julie Andrews twirling on a mountaintop.
Sweden? No. Switzerland.
No, Austria.
Oh, that other place. Okay. I've never seen Sound of Music.
Well, it's not. I mean, you wouldn't have to have seen that to know that that's like the artwork from the cover. But anyway, I think they crossed.
They're trying to get to Switzerland. They're trying to get to that.
They're trying to get to. Well, I don't know whether it's Austria or Switzerland. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyway, from Deutschfall News, in Austria, there is the town of fucking, and it has this. It's had this rather unfortunate name for a long time. And as we discussed with the town of Shitterton, there's a brisk trade in tourist items and a problem with a lot of thefts of the town sign. And so Mayor Andrea Holzner told the Austrian broadcaster OE24 News, I actually missed this story. This has already happened, that the town of fucking was changing its name effective January 1st of 2021. Fucking is now, it's kind of sort of going to mirror more phonetically how you would actually say that word with a German Austrian accent. So now it's Fugging. Fuging.
Booging. Okay.
Huging, Austria. There only are 100 people in this town. They've been apparently been pressing for a name change for years. It lies just north of Salzburg, right near the German border. But for some reason, Fucking has no meaning in German, which begs the question: how the hell did you get this name? But it doesn't. I mean, there's no meaning behind it. So they have been, frustrated with thefts of the signs and jokes, and this, signage is coming up in all kinds of internet searches, and probably has appeared on other podcasts. But there are like memes that help to further worthy causes. Apparently, there's one sort of climate science cause that has a meme that says our climate is fucking important, but fucking is the street sign in this image.
Okay.
But as of January 1st of 2021, it's now Fuging. There are two hamlets nearby of Oberfucking and Unterfucking, which haven't changed their names yet. If I were to steal a street sign, I would definitely want to have Oberfucking, I think, more than
So over fucking and under fucking, is that?
yes.
Yeah,
because they're I'm sure Oberfucking is either higher in elevation or it's north of, I guess, and then Unter, Unter fucking is, I don't know. So but it's been, it had been Fucking for literally 1,000 years. And my joke was, I'd say that once you've been fucking for 1,000 years, you just keep fucking. But they didn't ask me. But sometime soon, as part of this little segment, I will also I'll circle back and tell you about the English village of Cockermouth. That'll be on a later episode.
I would dare to say that I wait with bated breath.
Baited something.
I really thought you were going down that dark Sandusky, Ohio joke that I do all the time. I really thought you were going down that road. Okay, well,
I'm drawing a blank on your Jerry Sandusky joke, but maybe you'll tell me that offline.
I think that's probably best for all involved. Yeah.
Right. we suddenly have a whole bunch of followers drop off because of this episode.
The one that tries to be nice and not cuss, he told a dirty joke.
Someone needs to wash his mouth out with soap. All right, so we're going to shift gears here again and dive into my story. First, there's a slight preface to it. I was working this morning in my office, and there was a soft knock at my front door. I pondered for a moment who that might be, and it occurred to me that it might be my Amazon Prime delivery. I got up and I walked the 20 feet down the hallway, past my bathroom and into my living room. But by then I had forgotten why I had gotten up. So I grabbed my bed sheets that needed washing, threw them in the washing machine, but I failed to add soap. I also failed to start the machine. I was then distracted by hunger. I wolfed down half of a breakfast taco and a bit of coffee while standing over my kitchen sink. Then I started reading an article in the most recent New Yorker, still standing in my kitchen. I got a half dozen paragraphs into that when I recalled that I wanted to check the balance in my checking account. I grabbed my phone to do that, but was then interrupted with the thought, I wonder when that Amazon Prime package might get delivered. This is a long way of saying that I appreciate people who can maintain focus and tunnel vision, because I really can't do it. The only times in my life, it seems these days, when I'm able to maintain concentration is when I'm writing, researching, or recording this podcast. Otherwise, I am pretty useless. But as we wrap up Women's History Month, we're going to talk about 3 separate women quickly who are or were scientifically minded and who managed to offer up a lot in spite of their bothersome and inferior female genitalia, obviously. They offer up intelligence, determination, and a single-mindedness that is compelling and typically beyond me. Full disclosure, I'm going to completely mangle the science here for all 3 of them because I don't understand it. I find it interesting, but the nuts and bolts of it I don't get, and so I'm sure I am not explaining their work accurately or adequately. Anyway, here we go. Cecilia Helena Payne. She was born in 1900 in Buckinghamshire, England. She was one of 3 children. Her father died when she was 4. Her mother was forced to raise the family on her own, and they moved to London when she was 12. By the time she was 18, she was attending St. Paul's Girls' School in London, and this is kind of awesome. I mean, I included this just because I thought this was bizarre and compelling. She was instructed in piano by Gustav Holst. It's a little like having Georgia O'Keeffe as your art teacher, but it's, kind of cool. He urged her to look into a career in music. Apparently she had some aptitude for it, but she was focused on science. She won a scholarship that paid for all expenses to Newnham College, Cambridge, and she went there and studied physics and chemistry mostly. She attended a lecture by a man named Arthur Eddington about his trip to the west coast of Africa in 1919. He observed and photographed a near solar eclipse as a test of Einstein's general theory of relativity. She completed all of her classes, but could not be awarded a degree. Because she's a dick. She's a dick. Well said, Bryan. She's a chick, a dame, a skirt. Because Cambridge didn't award degrees to women at all until 1948. Decades later. So she realized that her only career path in England was to be a teacher. So she up and moved to the States and attended Radcliffe College as part of Harvard University. And she became the first person, male or female, to earn a PhD in astronomy from Harvard University.
Ooh.
Here's where we start to get incredibly dense. And I'm going to read this. I don't really understand it, but I think it's cool nonetheless.
Okay.
Her field of study, basically, she looked into the spectral classes of stars. Her extensive study showed there was a huge amounts of variation in the stellar absorption lines due to varying levels of ionization. Essentially, and again, this is where it's probably not accurate, she was able to determine how light refracted off of celestial bodies. And she was able to determine that things like silicon and carbon and other elements were in the same proportion in the sun as they are in the earth. But she was also able to discover that helium and hydrogen were phenomenally more abundant in the case of hydrogen, like 1 million times more abundant. And that position was in direct opposition to the commonly held belief by other scientists at the time. A guy named Henry Norris Russell was the astronomer who reviewed her dissertation, and he basically talked her out of publishing it because it flew in the face of what other scientists believed at the time, scientists with penises. He then published 4 years later, basically her findings. She is given a tiny footnote in there, but he is now widely credited for being the one that discovered that hydrogen was so prevalent and necessary for combustion and other processes. In short, if you're a woman and your dissertation advisor is a straight white man, you should probably be suspicious. She's now getting, 100 years later, the praise and recognition she deserves. And she really is viewed as led the way for other women to get into STEM. And as one of the footnotes I saw about her, she was an agnostic. And at one point she actually ran a scientific experiment on the efficacy of prayer. She had 2 groups of students that were prepping to take a test, and others were instructed to pray for one group, and so group A were the recipients of prayer, group B were not the recipients of prayer, and group B, the control group, actually tested higher on this test. So take that, Jesus. So anyway, that's number 1. Number 2, Henrietta Swan Leavitt, also exceptionally cool and learned in her own way, was born July 4th, 1868 in Massachusetts. This is a period of time where basically half of the adults in everyone's life they were somehow tied to the church. This is the case in her family. Fathers, uncles, etc., were deacons and ministers. In spite of her career in science, she actually remained religious throughout her entire life. And she actually went to Radcliffe College, Harvard as well. She didn't start studying astronomy until her 4th year of undergrad. And then she began working there as a, quote, human computer, whatever the hell that is, on at the Harvard College Observatory. So the director of the observatory, a guy named Edward Charles Pickering, was a name you might have heard of before.
I recognize that name. Yeah.
There's a second Pickering who's very scientifically minded as well. And, I may actually do an episode on them down the road. They're both apparently breathtakingly smart guys, and they're both completely odious in many respects. He asked her to measure and catalog the brightness of stars as they appeared in a set of photographic plates taken at the facility. Again, solely because she's a woman, she is given this task because women were not allowed to operate telescopes.
Jesus Christ.
Solely because of their gender. But dealing with the scientific data that was collected on the photographic plates, that was deemed to be okay. So that's what she did. Initially, Pickering didn't even have to pay her because she came from a family with money. So she wasn't actually even paid to do this for a certain period of time. She was paid later on, and she was universally viewed as being hardworking, serious-minded. She didn't have any frivolous pursuits, and all she did was work and tend to her family and attend church. Even though she was given this task that seemed to be menial and maybe even almost administrative, just this, whatever, she was able to learn quite a bit. So there are stars in the sky that are called Cepheid variables. So Polaris, the North Star, is a Cepheid. These stars pulse in a regular fashion, and these pulses change over time. Her groundbreaking work was able to further illustrate, based just on these photographic plates, where the Earth stood in space, where the Milky Way stood in space, and she was able to figure out with fairly simple calibrations, Earth's distance to any Cepheid star can be determined. So suddenly the universe became much older because of these calculations, but also much more measurable, much more knowable because of her. There's a guy named Jeremy Bernstein, who's a science writer, wrote of her variable stars had been of interest for years, but when she was studying those plates, I doubt Pickering thought she would make any significant discovery, at least not one that would eventually change astronomy, all because the men couldn't be bothered to look. There is a facility at the McDonald Observatory in Texas, out in Fort Davis, that's actually named for her. I think one of the telescopes.
I went out there as a kid. Yeah, I don't know when it was named, but I remember going to that observatory when I was a kid. Yeah.
So that's number 2. Number 3, Catherine Louise Bowman. She goes by Katie Bowman. She was born in 1989. She's way younger.
I know her.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Personally?
I know she is. Yeah. No. Via Twitter. Via Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah. So engineer, computer scientist. She works in computer imagery. And she was the one that came up with the algorithm for imaging black holes. She was a member of what was called the Event Horizon Telescope team that captured an image, the first image ever of a black hole. And this was in April of 2019. So, just 4 years ago. There also is, there's a fairly famous picture of a woman named Margaret Hamilton who wrote a ton of code for the space flight for Apollo 11, I think, and I think she worked on all of the Apollo missions. There's a picture of Hamilton standing next to a column of printed out, I'm sure old style dot matrix printers, and she's 3 inches shorter than the pile of code that she had written. There's also a picture of Katie Bowman, basically sitting in front of a collection of hard drives that held the algorithm that assembled this image. And when this was announced, I recall at the time being, they have a picture of what? I will include that picture in the show notes or as the image for this episode. because it is quite stunning. I mean, a picture of the Death Star wouldn't have impressed me more, frankly. It's just, it's so mind-boggling that they were able to do this. And she was, a critical component of that team. Katie's problem is that as of now, she's 34. At the time, she was 29 or maybe 30. And all of the online trolls completely lost their shit. They claimed that she could not have done this on her own, even though she never claimed that she'd done this on her own. She was very clear that there was a huge team. I'm not crystal clear why she was chosen to do. There are a couple TED Talks from her and other things you can find of her online. But bullies and misogynists, see her and kind of only care about the headline, I guess. There are all kinds of fake profiles made in her name on Instagram and Twitter elsewhere. She was apparently the subject of a fair amount of online and sexual harassment. And all she is this incredibly smart, capable human being, who has found her niche and is absolutely crushing it. And she is facing this type of just, horse shit behavior. Unfortunately, it's always the people who look like you and me who can't wrap their brains around anyone being pretty and smart, or female and smart, or black and smart, or Latino, or gay, or fill in the blank. People were screaming that she was the face of this press campaign for the picture because of her youth and appearance, and because, if in doubt, it's always fun to be hateful. And apparently she was subjected to quite a bit. There's an article I found from The Guardian UK, written by another woman, Jill Filipovich, and she is a science writer who's written quite a bit on this and other topics. And she is fairly prominent, and Filipovich is asked to speak fairly often to a number of groups and academic institutions. There's an article I found of hers in The Guardian from around that same time, from April of 2019, and she says, quote, "I'm sometimes invited to speak to journalism classes or to groups of college or high school students, and over again I hear the same question: how do you deal with the harassment? I only hear this question from girls and women. Women see how other women are treated when we shine or succeed, how quickly we are cut down, how insults snowball into threats, and are intimidated. I never have a good answer, except to say that the internet can be a tough place for women, and to the extent you can ignore it or even work to change misogynistic online culture, the better. But, quote, ignore the bullies, unquote, is deeply unsatisfying and profoundly unhelpful advice. Attacks from sexist trolls are overwhelming and destabilizing, but far worse is the slow drip of sexism that keeps women from achieving their full potential for power, success, and achievement every single day." I just thought that was a fabulous quote, sort of defending Bowman. But I'm not sure that she's completely correct, because in this day and age, as you were saying in your story, and as we were alluding to, talking about Trump and DeSantis, et cetera, the only way to deal with people who are, misogyny is a very long, difficult to spell word that basically just means bully. And the only adequate response to these people is to ignore them, because you can't argue with them. There's no, when you are attempting to argue with someone who has an agenda and who is determined to be hateful in this way, picking a fight is what they want. And so the only appropriate response is to say nothing. While that is not fun and not satisfying, it is the only adequate response. But anyway, in honor of wrapping up Women's History Month, I come across all three of these women at various points in time, and just decided to assemble them because I realized there was kind of a thread between them, where 100 years ago and today, the same nonsense is still happening, and it's always people that look like you and me that are doing it.
That is true. Yeah, one of the things I knew about Bowman was that she, when I would follow her on Twitter, is she was pretty good at, as I recall, just kind of, yes, she would, yes, but, and then she would point out the science behind what she was saying. And,
Right.
she'd get challenged. She goes, because I have a PhD, because I know, I mean, and it wasn't done in a dismissive way, but it's like, because science, I mean, what more do you want from that?
Right.
And in regards
just
to,
because you can't understand a more complicated response doesn't mean it's wrong.
you're right, and I've gotten to the point in my life where if I don't understand something, someone says, "Do you get it?" I'll be, "No,
Nope.
I have no idea what you're doing." My wife is the scientist in the family. When the boys have science questions or math questions, they go to mom. When it's history or English stuff, they come to me.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. And in regards to what you said about bullies, sometimes, just sometimes, Brian, there's a pizza box in the picture that gets you in trouble, and the bully goes to jail.
Oh,
Andrew
Andrew
Tate?
Tate. Right.
Yeah.
I took me a second. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Right.
sometimes watching a bully trip over their own dick is a
Right.
satisfying, but then again, I'm speaking as another guy, not as a woman. So what do I know? But
Yeah.
that's three remarkable stories there.
Yeah, it's super peculiar and super frustrating. I just don't understand why people insist that their ignorance is as good as someone else's intelligence or education or knowledge.
Yeah.
And I've we've talked about this, a few times, either directly or kind of tangent to it. And that's why, if I suddenly thought I had cancer, I wouldn't go to a podiatrist, right? Because, right? Doesn't that make sense? So why, when there's no, I guess it really just comes down to people only care about things that affect them directly or personally. It's easy to adopt a position of ignorance or further this agenda when it's not really going to hurt you. So you can be shitty to someone like Bowman, and question her integrity or her intelligence or her role when this doesn't really matter. But you really want the right person with the right know-how when your life is on the line.
Was it a requirement back in the 1900s for male scientists to be smart and shitty? Was that just part
Certainly
of
seems
the...
like it.
Look,
maybe they just were by default.
you can be smart, but you have to be kind of,
You have to
shitty
be
asshole.
a bit of a douche in most respects.
Or you could be a decent human being and be dumb.
Right. One or the other, not both.
Those three great stories, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah.
Will this be the last episode of... I guess it will, because this will drop on... okay. So
This is drop on the 28th, wrapping up Women's History Month with three more women.
Conclusion to Women's History Month here on Dream Idiots. Yeah, I think both of our stories, in that weird way, just show that history just keeps on trucking.
Mm-hmm.
Assholes then, assholes now. We just gotta keep kicking back against them.
Yep, there you go.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Another week down.
Another one
62
in the can.
Episode
Please.
62.
Yeah, please keep listening and sharing. Post us on Facebook. Tell your friends. Grab their phone and follow on their behalf. And give us 5 stars on all those platforms. That'd be hugely appreciated. DreamIdiots.com and Facebook, Instagram, all those things I mentioned before. We'd appreciate it.
All right. Be good to each other. Bye.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong.
Mm-hmm.
Brian.
Bong bong.
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.